this episode, we're going to focus on one of the highest leverage moments in strategic security work, briefing executives in a way that leads to a decision that is both fast and durable. When beginners imagine an executive briefing, they often picture a long presentation full of technical detail meant to prove competence, but that approach usually slows decisions and creates confusion. Executives make decisions under time pressure, and their job is to balance risk, cost, opportunity, and accountability across the entire organization. Your job in a briefing is to make their decision easier by providing clarity, not by overwhelming them with complexity. Precision does not mean being short at all costs. It means choosing the right information, framing it in business terms, and presenting it in a decision-ready shape. When the briefing is precise, the decision lands quickly because the trade-offs are clear, and the decision sticks because the rationale is defensible and shared. This is a core GST/RT skill because leadership is measured by how effectively you turn risk insight into action. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A precise executive briefing starts with a clear answer to why this is on the agenda now, because timing is part of what executives are evaluating. If you cannot explain why the topic matters today, it will feel like noise competing with urgent business priorities. The why now can be driven by a change in exposure, a new obligation, a recent incident, a business shift like a new product launch, or new evidence that a risk is more urgent than previously believed. The key is to state the trigger in plain language so it does not sound like a vague warning. For example, instead of saying threats are increasing, you can describe that a critical process depends on a pathway that has weak controls and that the impact of failure is high given current business reliance. This creates urgency without drama, which is important because executives are often skeptical of security arguments that rely on fear. When the reason for urgency is clear and grounded, leaders are more willing to allocate attention and resources, and the briefing begins with credibility rather than resistance. Once urgency is established, the briefing needs to name the objective being protected because executives think in outcomes. The objective might be protecting customer trust, maintaining reliable service, meeting contractual commitments, reducing fraud, or supporting growth without unacceptable risk. If you do not name the objective, the conversation can drift into technical debate, and technical debate is not what executives are there to do. Naming the objective also helps align multiple executives who may have different priorities, because shared objectives are the common ground for decision-making. A precise briefing then links the risk to the objective by explaining what could happen and how that would harm the outcome. This is where translating technical risk into business impact becomes central, because you want the risk story to be easy to grasp and hard to misinterpret. When executives can see the direct connection between a security issue and an outcome they own, they are far more likely to make a decision quickly. The next element is describing the risk in a way that is concrete but not technical, because executives need a clear threat story without a deep mechanism lesson. A useful structure is to name the asset or process at risk, describe the threat capability, and describe the likely impact if the threat succeeds. The asset might be a critical service, sensitive customer data, identity pathways, or a core transaction system. The threat capability might be unauthorized access, manipulation of transactions, disruption of availability, or loss of integrity in records. The impact might include financial loss, downtime, legal exposure, and reputational harm. This is precise because each part has a role, and it prevents you from drifting into vague statements like "this is a serious risk." It also allows executives to ask focused questions that improve decision quality rather than broad questions that restart the conversation. Beginners sometimes over-explain mechanisms to prove they understand them, but that can backfire because it hides the decision under details. Precision means you keep the story at the level that supports the decision, and you reserve technical depth for follow-up if requested. After the risk story, the executive needs to understand how confident you are and what evidence supports that confidence, because decision-makers are judging not only risk, but the reliability of your assessment. Evidence can include how critical the process is, what obligations amplify consequences, what exposure exists, and what past incidents suggest about vulnerability. It can also include the organization's current readiness, such as how quickly it can detect issues or recover from disruption. Precision here means you do not pretend certainty where it does not exist, but you also do not present everything as unknowable. You can explain that impact is high because the process is critical and obligations are strong, while likelihood is plausible because exposure and common attacker incentives align. You can also note where uncertainty exists, such as limited visibility in a pathway, and propose an action that reduces uncertainty while improving security. Executives appreciate honest confidence levels because it helps them evaluate the trade-off between acting now and gathering more information. A precise briefing gives them enough evidence to choose responsibly without delaying indefinitely. Now the briefing must offer decision options. Because executives are not there to listen to problems, they are there to choose paths. A strong briefing provides a small number of options, each with clear trade-offs in cost, timing, operational impact, and risk reduction. Options should include what will be done, what resources are required, what timeline is realistic, and what outcome improvement is expected. For example, one option might be immediate mitigation that reduces exposure quickly with minimal disruption. Another might be a phased improvement that builds a longer-term solution, and another might involve accepting some risk temporarily with compensating controls and a scheduled revisit. The key is that options must be comparable, meaning they are framed in the same dimensions so executives can weigh them efficiently. If options are not comparable, decision-making slows because people cannot see the trade-offs clearly. Precision in option framing also reduces politics because it shifts the conversation from arguing about a single proposal to choosing among defined paths. That selection dynamic helps decisions land more quickly. Another crucial element is making clear what decision you are actually asking for, because many briefings fail when the request is vague. Are you asking for funding, approval of a policy direction, acceptance of a risk, allocation of staff time, or prioritization over competing initiatives? A precise briefing states the decision request in one sentence and ties it to the options presented. This prevents the common stall where executives leave the meeting thinking they agreed to something, but nobody is sure what it was. It also helps leaders who were not part of the briefing understand what was decided later, because the decision request becomes the anchor. A decision that sticks is one that is explicit, owned, and tied to a clear rationale. Beginners sometimes fear being direct, but directness is respectful in executive contexts because it saves time and reduces misinterpretation. Precision is not only about content. It is about asking clearly for the action you need. To make a decision stick, you also need to define how it will be executed and how progress will be measured, because executives care about follow-through and accountability. Execution clarity includes who owns the work, who supports it, and what milestones matter. Measurement clarity includes what signals will show that the decision produced the intended benefit, such as reduced exposure, improved recovery performance, fewer incidents, or improved audit outcomes. These signals might be captured in KPI or other performance measures, but the key is that they are connected to the business objective, not just to security activity. If you only measure activity, like number of documents written, you can create the illusion of progress without real risk reduction. Executives want to see outcome movement, such as improved reliability or reduced likelihood of a high-impact event. When you define ownership and measures, you also reduce churn, because stakeholders can see progress and are less likely to reopen the decision due to uncertainty. A decision sticks when it becomes part of an execution plan with visible accountability. A precise briefing also anticipates likely executive questions, because leaders will probe areas like cost, timing, impact to operations, and what happens if you do nothing. If you are unprepared for these questions, the briefing can derail into side debates, and that slows decisions. You do not need to answer every question in the initial statement, but you should be ready to answer quickly with clear reasoning. The do-nothing scenario is especially important, because executives often need to understand the consequence of deferring action. A calm, realistic description of the do-nothing outcome helps leaders see the cost of delay. Another common question is what risks remain even after action, because no solution eliminates all risk. A strategic briefing acknowledges residual risk and explains how it will be managed, such as through monitoring, compensating controls, or follow-up phases. This honesty builds trust and reduces the chance that executives feel misled later. Precision here means you have thought through the decision landscape, not only your preferred solution. It is also important to recognize that executive briefings are often multi-stakeholder events, meaning different leaders may have different incentives and may interpret the same risk differently. A precise briefing, therefore, uses shared objectives and business impact categories to create a common language. Financial leaders may focus on cost and loss avoidance. Operational leaders may focus on uptime and recovery. Legal leaders may focus on obligations and defensibility, and product leaders may focus on speed and customer experience. Your briefing should connect the decision to these concerns without turning into multiple separate briefings. You do that by framing the impact in categories like financial, operational, legal, and reputational, and by showing how the options address those categories. This reduces conflict because leaders can see how the trade-offs are being considered. It also reduces turf wars because the decision is framed as an organizational choice rather than as a security demand. When leaders see that their concerns were anticipated and respected, they are more likely to support the decision and help it stick in their own areas. A subtle but powerful part of precision is controlling scope, because scope creep is one of the biggest reasons executive decisions fail to stick. If the briefing is trying to solve too many problems at once, the decision becomes harder and people hesitate. A better approach is to define a clear scope for the decision, such as addressing the highest leverage risk pathway first, then scheduling follow-on work. This makes the decision easier because it is bounded, and it increases the chance of execution because it is achievable. It also creates momentum, because a smaller decision that is implemented successfully builds trust for larger changes later. Scope control is also a fairness issue, because teams need to know what they are committing to. If executives approve a vague initiative and later discover it is much larger, trust erodes and churn begins. Precision means you are honest about scope, you define phases when needed, and you make sure commitments match reality. That is how you prevent the decision from being reopened repeatedly due to surprise. To make decisions land quickly, your delivery must be confident but not aggressive, because tone influences how information is received. A calm, structured briefing suggests that the situation is manageable and that you are bringing leaders a solvable choice, not a crisis to panic about. Aggressive or dramatic framing can trigger defensiveness, especially if leaders feel they are being pressured without adequate evidence. Calm precision also makes it easier for executives to ask questions, because the conversation feels stable rather than tense. This is important because executive questions often improve the decision by clarifying constraints, resources, and timing. A briefing that invites questions without losing structure is more likely to produce a decision that is both fast and thoughtful. Beginners sometimes think that to be persuasive they must be intense, but strategic persuasion is usually about clarity, credibility, and respect for constraints. When your tone communicates those qualities, leaders are more likely to trust your recommendations and commit resources. As we close, remember that a precise executive briefing is a decision engine. It transforms risk insight into an explicit choice with clear trade-offs and clear ownership. You begin with why now, so the topic earns attention without fear, and you name the objective being protected so the conversation stays outcome-focused. You describe the risk story at a business level, linking assets and threat capabilities to realistic impacts, and you provide evidence and confidence levels that help leaders judge urgency responsibly. You present a small set of comparable options with clear trade-offs, and you state the decision request in one sentence, so there is no ambiguity about what action you need. You define execution ownership and outcome-focused measures so follow-through is visible and accountability is real, and you anticipate executive questions so the meeting does not derail into churn. You use shared impact categories to align multiple leaders, control scope through bounded phases, and deliver with calm precision so decisions feel manageable and trustworthy. When you can brief this way, decisions land quickly because leaders understand what they are choosing, and decisions stick because the rationale, ownership, and measurement are clear. That is the culmination of the strategic skills you have been building, And it is exactly the kind of leadership clarity the GST-RT certification expects you to demonstrate.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.